I have a serious question. How hard do you want to hit somebody in the face? This is not a rhetorical question. I'm asking because today we're going to be covering the channel's first Voltron commander, and I really need to know exactly how many points of damage do you want to put down somebody's throat. If it's 21, we can get you there. And we can get you there because today we are talking about Galea, Kindler of Hope. Now, this is a fun commander if you have not played her already. Her abilities are Vigilance. You can look at the top card of your library any time, and then you can cast auras and equipment spells from the top of your library. And then when you cast an equipment spell this way, it will auto-equip to any creature that we have. Now, Galea is an interesting commander. You can build her one of three ways. You can build an aura or an equipment deck, or you can build a deck that tries to mix between the two. Now, because we are running on a $15 budget, and she can take up only $1 of that budget, and then the 99 of the deck can take up $15, give or take a few cents, we have to be very, very careful about what side we lean on. We don't really have the ability to lean hard into the equipment, and looking at the enchantments, it was actually kind of hard to lean hard into the enchantments, too. Turns out a lot of their cards are really expensive. But with some recent reprints, I was able to finagle something. So let's go ahead and get into the ramp section of the deck so you can see just what we were able to finagle. The strategy we're going to be going for is punching people in the face really hard and really, really fast. So we are looking at the ramp section, starting out with Honored Heirloom. We can exile a card from anybody's graveyard if we have it, and it also can tap for any mana, which matters a lot to us because we are a 3-mana deck. Then we have Farhaven Elf and Wood Elf. Now, the reason I went for these specifically is, unlike things like Rampant Growth, these cards sit on the board as creatures. And one of the things Voltron decks are weak to is Edict effects. Effects that make everybody sacrifice a card on the board. So like Fleshbag Marauder type things. So it's important for you to have extra creatures on the board to protect yourself from those kinds of effects. So 2 of our ramp spells are creatures here. We do have Search for Tomorrow because it comes out very, very early. We have Wayfarer's Bauble, which can crack itself for any type of basic land in the deck. We have Wild Growth, which is an enchantment that can enchant a land and make it tap for an additional green. Overgrowth can enchant a land so it taps for an additional 2 green. Utopia Sprawl can tap for any color when it's on a forest, and Fertile Ground can enchant a land and add 1 mana of any color when it is on a card. Now, these cards are important to note because they are ramp spells that we can basically cast with our commander off the top of our library. That's right. Galea doesn't care if the enchantment spells or the auras go on creatures. She doesn't care about that at all. So half of our ramp package just comes off the top of the deck with Galea. So that helps us out a ton in this deck. The other way we're going to have to be consistent in the deck, though, is with our draw package. And surprisingly, a lot of the Enchantress draw cards were not that expensive. Let's take a look here. Tanglespan Lookout says when an aura enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. We are running about 35 auras in this deck, about 30, 34, 35-ish. So this card will almost always get a trigger. Elvish Archivist, whenever you play an artifact, put 2/1/1 counters on the Archivist. But if you play an enchantment, you get to draw a card, and it only triggers once per turn. I love the Elvish Archivist. I have a full power Galea deck that doesn't have a budgetary restriction. It's got an Argothian Enchantress in it and everything. I still run an Elvish Archivist in my 99. I adore this card. This is like my favorite kind of Magic the Gathering design. It is fair, it is simple, and it is modal. I love it. Then we have Staggering Insight. We can enchant a creature, give it 1/1, and it has lifelink, and anytime it deals combat damage to a player, it will draw a card. So our commander will just become a small draw engine with this. Enchantress's Presence. Every time we play an enchantment, we get to draw a card. Eidolon Blossom says the exact same thing. Satyr Enchanter and Mesa Enchantress all say the same thing. Setessan Champion says when an enchantment enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on it, and then also draw a card. And SRAM says when you play an artifact, or an aura, equipment, or vehicle, you get to draw a card. So 8 Enchantress effects in the deck, and then 1 card that is going to be drawing us cards incrementally with our commander. That is a lot of enchantment effects. But we also need to make sure that our commander can survive when it's on the board. So let's talk about the ways we are going to be protecting our commander. But first, we have 2 special things to talk about. 1 is top deck manipulation, and 2 is tutors. I'm not a big fan of running tutors, but I lied to you when I said that we have 8 enchantresses, because we actually have 9. Ephara the Ever Sheltering. has lifelink and indestructible as long as you control at least 3 other enchantments. But every time an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card. Now, this card looks interesting, doesn't it? Well, it looks interesting because it's actually a backside of a battle. Invasion of Theros. When Invasion of Theros ETB, search your library for an aura, a god, or a demigod, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So we're going to play this card, and it just happens to have 4 health as a card. So our commander will always be able to just tap the Invasion of Theros immediately and give us our 9th Enchantress in Ifara. I love this card. It is beautiful. It is tutoring. It is draw power. It is itself an enchantment, so it increases our enchantment count, which you'll see why that matters later. This does a lot of work for us. Then we have 1 card for dedicated top deck manipulation, only because I couldn't fit the other ones in here. If you're playing a non-budget version of the deck, you can run things like Brainstorm, Sensei's Divining Top, Scroll Rack, and Reality Chip. And I'm running all of those in my version of the deck, but in this version of the deck, we have to actually run with a different type of top deck manipulation. And I'll show you the kind we're going with later, but this is the one dedicated card to it. Brainstone, we can sack it to draw 3 cards and then put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library. So you want to put an aura on top of your library when you do this so that you can guarantee that Galea sees something. But let's talk about protecting Galea, because more important than how you kill people in Voltron is how you keep your commander on the board. So let's start with the targeted protection effects. We have Mirror Shield, gives our commander Death Touch, and basically protection, or gives our commander Hexproof and basically protection from Death Touch with it. Curator's Ward gives it Hexproof, and when it leaves the battlefield, it will draw us 2 cards. Shielding Plaques draws us a card when it hits the battlefield, and it also makes our Galea have Hexproof. And then the Giant's Amulet makes our Galea have Hexproof as long as it's untapped. Turns out, Galea's never going to tap because she actually has Vigilance. So we will always have access to that protection there. Now, I mentioned Edict effects earlier. So let's talk about how we're protecting ourselves from Edict effects. We have Fist of the Ironwood. When it comes onto the battlefield, it'll give our commander Trample, which is a good version of evasion we have access to, but it also makes 2 1/1 green Saproling tokens. This does not seem important until Fleshbag Marauder is on the board for the 12th time because you're fighting a Gissa and Geralf deck. Then we have Cathar's Call. Enchanted creature gets Vigilance. We already have that, but at the beginning of your end step, make a 1/1 white creature token. So we are always creating 1 token to protect ourselves from Edict effects with this. And then we have Siona, Captain of Pylis. This card, when it comes onto the battlefield, we get to get 7 cards from the top of our library, put an aura card from among them into our hand, put the rest on the bottom. But the more important part of this card, arguably, is that every time an aura enters our battlefield, we get to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So every time we get to do what our deck is basically doing all the time anyway, we are going to be getting free tokens so that we do not die to Edict effects. There's one other type of effect we need to protect ourselves from, because we really can't do much about blanketed exile in these budgetary restrictions, but we do need protection from destruction. So we have 4 ways to protect ourselves from destruction: Hyena Umbra, Boar Umbra, and Eel Umbra, which all give the ability to have totem armor. Whenever the creature would die, we can just sack the armor instead, and suddenly the commander will survive. And then Savage Silhouette. The creature will get 2/2 and has pay 2 to regenerate this creature. You do have to remember to have mana open for the regeneration with this ability, but it's not the hardest thing in the world to activate with the effect. Now, the next important part of any Voltron deck is how we are getting our creatures in on other people. What types of evasion are we using? Now, for those who don't know, evasion just means that your commander has the ability to get into somebody's life regardless of what their board state is with creatures. So let's talk about the 12 ways we have to give our commander evasion. Angelic Gift will give it flying, and we draw a card when it comes into play. Arcane Flight gives it 1/1 in flying. Ghostly Wings gives it 1/1 in flying. Stetson Training gives it 1/0 and trample, and we play it, we get to draw a card. The Cartouche of Knowledge draws us a card when it comes out, gives a creature 1/1 and flying. Spectral Flight will give it 2/2 in flying. Rune of Flight will give it flying and also draws a card when it comes out. We also can enchant an equipment with this as well. So if our commander dies, the equipment will live and the rune will sit on the equipment, giving us that ability basically until they blow up the equipment. So we actually have more uses with Rune of Flight than you might think. Skyblade's Boon enchants a creature, gives it 1/1 and flying. Importantly, though, we can pay 2 to return it to our hand if it's in the graveyard. So this is flying we'll always have access to. Then we have Aqueous Form. It gives our creature unblockable, and then it means that whenever our creature attacks, we get to scry 1. This is one of the other ways we have to manipulate the top of our deck, we can make sure, oh, I don't like the card on top. I'm going to throw it to the bottom. Oh, look, there's an aura there. Now I'm going to cast that with my commander, so I didn't ever have to draw it ever. Unflinching Courage gives a creature 2/2 trample and lifelink. Griff's Boon gives a creature 1/0 and flying, and just like the Skyblade's Boon, we can get it from our graveyard back onto a creature automatically. So it's a little stronger than the Skyblade's Boon, actually, because it costs 1 less mana to play, and it costs 1 less mana to equip to a creature or to enchant a creature, rather, when we use its ability. And then we have the Talons of Wildwood. It will give a creature 1/1 and trample, and like with the Skyblade's Boon, this lets us put it from our graveyard into our hand, so we have access to it for the entirety of the game. If you're wondering why Rancor is not here, the answer is, as per usual, budgetary restrictions. We have a very strict budget, and I'm not willing to go more than a few cents over the $15 limit when I'm building these. I want to make sure that we are able to get all of our stuff. These are the ways we are hitting people in the face. But there's another important way to make sure we don't lose the game, and that is making sure our opponent does not get to keep cards on the board. So how are we managing that in this deck? Well, turns out there's a lot of removal in the game that is enchantment based. That's right, we can actually play removal cards off the top of our deck. Let's take a look at one of these. Kasmina's Transmutation. A creature loses all abilities and it becomes a 1/1. If our commander has evasion, we can just let that creature sit on the board forever and not do anything. Our opponents are going to have to politic their way into getting their commanders back when we cast this on them. Minimus Containment can enchant any non-land permanent and turn it into a treasure. This can turn anything in the game off. It's just a fun card. Broker's Charm can be played for the Bant cost that our deck has. Choose one. A creature gets 1/0 and then deals damage equal to its power to an opponent, creature or planeswalker. Or we can destroy an enchantment, or we can draw 2 cards. So we get a good fight, or a draw spell, or enchantment removal. Negate is our only counter spell in the deck because non-creature spells are the most important cards to stop. Those are the board wipes. These are the things that are going to clear us out. This is, this is here for farewell. We only have one way to protect ourselves from farewell, and it's negate. Eaten by Piranhas will turn a creature into a skeleton with base power 1/1 and no abilities. It's also a flash card, so we can keep this on the top of our deck past turn, and when our opponent does something unruly, we can just Eaten by Piranhas their card and laugh maniacally. Cartouche of Strength. When it enters the battlefield, our creature will fight a creature, so that's a way to kill a card, but the enchanted creature will gain 1/1 and trample. So we make our commander fight a creature, kill it, and then give it trample. Lotharian Blade. When the equipped creature attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to any creature the defending player controls. Equip Elf 2. Galea is an elf, so we can pay 2, put this on Galea, and then every time we swing Galea at somebody, we are going to kill one of their creatures, because 9 times out of 10, we will have the biggest creature on the board. We are the Voltron player after all. Then we have Bant Charm. Again, cast it for Bant, destroy an artifact, put a creature on the bottom of its owner's library, or counter an instant spell. This won't work on most of the board wipes in the game, like Negate will, but there are plenty of instances that we want to make sure do not have the ability to go off in the game. For instance, let's say we're swinging at the white player, not white that, but white the color. You swing at the white player, and the white player goes, I'm going to play Teferi's Protection to get away from you. And you go, no, I'm going to play Bant Charm. You don't get Teferi's Protection, and you lose the game. Oopsie doodle. Then Lignify. This card will enchant a creature and turn it into an 0/4 Tree Folk with no abilities. This is actually one of our better cards in the removal slot, because as an 0/4 Tree Folk, it's harder for them to get that off the board than with a 1/1. And then Witness Protection. Enchant a creature, it loses all abilities, and it becomes a 1/1 legitimate business person citizen. So this is our last way of making sure that creatures on the board, or any cards on the board, are enchanted out of use. Then we have the next important part of the deck. How are we winning? We've got ways to incrementally get our commander bigger. We've got ways to control the board. How are we going to make sure that our opponents take lethal damage? Let me introduce you to the big enchantment power section of the deck. All these cards almost read the same thing. Let's start with Nettlecyst. Comes into the board, has Living Weapon. It will create a token that, again, gives you Edict Protection. Any equipped creature gains 1/1 for every artifact and equipment we control. If we play this off the top of our deck, though, please do mind that the Phyrexian Germ will probably just die automatically, because we want this on our commander more often than not. So for all of our lands that are enchanted, for all of our enchantment cards that are on the board, all of our enchantresses that are on the board that have enchantment as part of their type, this is going to give us power. Every single aura attached to our commander, this is giving us oodles and oodles of power. All that glitters gets 1/1 for every enchantment or artifact you control. Spectral Steel gives a creature 2/2, and we can exile it from our graveyard to return any aura or equipment from our graveyard to our hand. So any of these cards, these are going to be lightning rods for our opponent. They're going to try to kill these as fast as possible. So we are going to make sure that Spectral Steel is here as an almost dedicated way to get these back exclusively. Thran Power Suit gives a creature 1/1 for every aura and equipment attached to it, and gives it Ward 2 as a method of protection. This is one of our other only ways of giving a creature exile protection, because sometimes exile is a targeted effect. Then we have Ethereal Armor. Enchant creature gets 1/1 for every enchantment you control and first strike. And then the big boy, Sage's Reverie. Enchanted creature gets 1/1 for every aura you control that's attached to it, but we also draw a card for every aura attached to it when we play Sage's Reverie. This card does a ton. This gets us back out from backfoot games more often than not, and because it is one of our bigger enchantments, it's also probably closing out one of our opponent's turns. But there is another way our opponent can stop us, and we need to be prepared for that other way they can stop us. The two things we don't really have good answers for are big boards that can get around our evasion, so like a fairy board with a lot of flyers, or when they kill our commander enough times to where it's not feasible for us to cast it. I have made mention in other decks you need to have strategies when these things come into play, so let's talk about the strategies we are employing to take care of both of those. First, lots of creatures on the board. You have board wipes. Divine Reckoning, each person chooses a creature they control and then destroys everything else, and we can cast it not once but twice because it has flashback. We choose to keep our commander, everybody else loses a bunch of important pieces, we lose basically nothing. And then we have Winds of Wrath, blow up every creature that is not enchanted. Our commander is probably going to be the only enchanted thing. Importantly, though, if we use one of our removal spells that enchants a creature, so if we happen to put something under the Kasmina's Transmutation, the Winds of Wrath will not kill their commander, so we get to keep their commander locked down for the entirety of the game this way. It's a really silly thing you can do. And again, if you're playing the deck with no budgetary restrictions, you can also have things like Darksteel Mutation in there to keep things locked down even better. Imprison of the Moon is also really good for this slot. I have it in my full power version of the deck. And then we have two methods of recursion in the deck, one of which is actually our deck's lieutenant commander. First, we have Denitha, the new Benala's Light. This is a Vigilance Trample lifelink creature, and when it enters, when it's on the board, during each of our turns, we can cast an aura or equipment spell from our graveyard, so we can get back our big cards, or we can get back our removal cards. Any of those cards can be played with this. We can remove things off the board, we can make sure our commander gets bigger, we can give it evasion, we can draw cards off of this, because we have our enchantresses that give us draw off of enchantments. All around, just a solid card. But the lieutenant of the deck is this girl, Bruna, the Light of Alabaster. She's got flying and vigilance, and whenever she attacks or blocks, you may attach any number of auras on the battlefield, and you may put onto the battlefield attached to it any number of auras from your graveyard or your hand. So if we are late in the game and we cannot get, we just cannot get it up anymore. Galea's down, she's not being cast anymore, we cast Bruna. And then we wait a turn cycle. They've used a lot of removal on us, or we're protecting Bruna with like a Broker's Charm or a Negate. Bruna is sitting here. We swing at one person, and then suddenly their lights just go out, because they aren't just getting hit with a 5/5 creature, they get an auto-equip of All That Glitters, and Ethereal Armor, and Sage's Reverie, and then they're also getting an auto-equip of things like the Aqueous Form, the Unflinching Courage. Bruna minimum, unless we've got graveyard control hitting us, which is unlikely because we're not a graveyard deck, Bruna's probably going to be smacking people for about 20 to 30 damage in the late game, if not more, and then drawing us tons of cards, because we're going to be getting all those enchantments on the board, triggering our enchantresses. Some of the enchantments we're going to be playing with this will auto give us draws anyway. Bruna just does a ton of work in this deck. She also works as her own commander as well, so maybe have fun building that too. But now we got to talk about the ramp, or the land section of the deck. And there's a reason that I mentioned top deck manipulation earlier in the video. So we have not the usual slew, but a whole 10 fetching lands. Now, why do we have these? Well, because fetching lands shuffle our deck. If we don't like the top card of our deck, One of the cheapest ways you have to do top deck manipulation is to just shuffle your deck. So Myriad Landscape, Warped Landscape, Shire Terrace, Terramorphic Expanse, Terminal Moraine, Ash Barrens, Evolving Wilds, Promising Vein, Bant Panorama, all of these will get us a deck shuffle, and all of these will get us a land of a color that we need, so we can guarantee that our commander comes out as soon as possible, so we're not missing certain mana pips. But the most important thing they do is shuffle our deck. Then we have Crow's Verge. It can sack itself to get a forest and a plains onto our battlefield. Note, it doesn't say basic, so we can get a Tangled Islet and a Prairie Stream off of this. We can get a Scattered Groves and a Canopy Vista. We can get an Irrigated Highland and a Tangled Islet off of this, which is why the entire dual section of the deck right here is filled with fetchable lands. Lands that can come into play with the Wood Elves, lands that can come into play with Crow's Verge. We've also got 4 other dual lands in the deck, 2 reveal lands in Port Town and Fortified Village, and 2 filter lands in Sungrass Prairie and Skycloud Expanse. Then we've got 2 Omni lands, Exotic Orchard and Command Tower. And then we've got something I normally wouldn't run in decks at all, temples. Now, those who have watched the SpicyTech podcast know that I have a disdain for temples, but we are playing a Galea deck, which means we really like top deck manipulation. So scrying is a lot more powerful in this deck than it otherwise would be. So we have all 3 temples in the colors that Galea can allow for, and each of these temples will scry us 1 when they come onto the board. So what you want to do with these is if you can wait to play them, wait to play them until you need to manipulate the top of your deck, because you know that, oh, Galea's let me see that I've got a land on top. I don't want it. I'm going to play the temple to scry to the bottom and see if I can't fish for an enchantment or an equipment. Use these sparingly, treat them less like lands and more like spells, and they will treat you better. And then finally, we have the thing that you want to also hold in your hand until very late in the game. I'm begging you, if you have any experience being a Voltron player, if you play Rogue's Passage too early, you'll just lose the game. You will just lose the game. Because nobody, but nobody in their right mind will let the Voltron player live for more than a turn or 2 if they know that the commander has unblockable, and the unblockable is on a land that is ridiculously hard to kill. Please, I beg of thee, if you play Galea or any Voltron commander, make sure that Rogue's Passage is played on the turn you plan on annihilating your biggest threat, and not a turn sooner. You will be thankful. Unless you have to play it because you desperately need the mana, hold it in your hand, pretend it's a spell, treat it well. Then we have 4 plains, 4 forest, and 3 islands as the last of the lands in the deck. So that was Galea, an Enchantress version of Galea, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. She is one of my favorite commanders that I have built in full power right now. She has an incredibly easy upgrade path if you want to pick her up as a $15 deck and then start tinkering with her card by card. There are some stupid expensive cards you can put in, like our Gothian Enchantress, and then there are some less expensive cards you can put in, like, say, not Maskwood Nexus, what am I thinking of? The big mask, the one that gives Ancestral Mask, the one that gives 2/2 for every enchantment on the board, not just your board, every enchantment on the board. There's a lot of really, really good cards that are not super expensive you can put in that just don't fit into this budget. If you build her, you won't have a bad time. Enchantress is a fun, mechanically dense thing to do. It draws tons of cards. It has lots of different utility you can do, and the absolutely huge numbers you can get with Galea's ability, with just giving her things like Sage's Reverie and Nettlecyst and Ethereal Armor. You can make her huge, and just, it feels good to smack somebody with huge damage. I'm not even gonna lie. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you have any other decks that you want me to try to build, let me know down there. I'm always taking suggestions. If you've seen most of the episodes so far, a good 20 or 30% of the decks that I've built so far have been suggestions from the audience. So let me know what you think. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.